Have you ever watched a cartoon that felt just a little too real, too dark, too heavy for the kids it was meant for? Animation has always been a mask, a way to hide adult fears behind bright colors. But sometimes that mask slipped. What if the shows we thought were harmless, Saturday morning fun were actually nightmares for grown-ups? Let's uncover 12 so-called kids' cartoons that were never meant for innocent eyes. Number 12. Watership Down, 1978. It looked like a soft watercolor tale about rabbits and friendship, but Watership Down was a wolf in rabbit's clothing. Based on Richard Adams's novel, it was an animated odyssey about survival violence and trauma disguised as a bedtime story. Children expecting fluffy woodland fun were greeted instead with brutal scenes of predators' claws and suffocation in tunnels. The film's tone was unflinching. Rabbits bled and screamed. Dreams were haunted by prophetic visions of death. The music was mournful, the art deceptively serene. Parents who took their children expecting something like The Rescuers were horrified halfway through. Some theaters even had to post warning signs after waves of complaints poured in. Censors in several countries debated whether it was suitable for television. In Britain, it was broadcast uncut for years, sparking outrage every Easter when families accidentally tuned in. Psychologists later described it as one of the most traumatic viewing experiences of childhood television. Behind the scenes, director Martin Rosen refused to soften anything. He said the story was about leadership and sacrifice, not cuddles. His defiance made the film both infamous and unforgettable. Today, Watership Down stands as an animated war film wearing the skin of a children's fable. It proved that cartoons could wound as deeply as they could inspire. A generation never looked at rabbits the same way again. Number 11. The Plague Dogs, 1982. If Watership Down scarred audiences, The Plague Dogs finished the job. Directed by the same man this time, it told the story of two dogs escaping from a government lab after years of experimentation. What followed was not adventure, but despair. The dogs wandered the bleak countryside, hunted by humans, while clinging to hope that maybe somewhere they were still loved. It was one of the darkest animated films ever made. Scientists drowned animals in testing tanks. One dog was burned in cruel trials. And when news spread that they might carry disease, the military was called to exterminate them. Audiences walked out weeping. Critics called it brilliant but unbearable. Censors slashed scenes in the American version, cutting its most disturbing imagery, yet the pain still bled through. Television networks refused to air it, and video stores tucked it away in the horror section. Even Richard Adams admitted that this story was almost too bleak to bear. Behind the camera, the production nearly collapsed due to lack of funds. Animators painted in silence, haunted by the material. Some quit halfway, unable to stomach another frame of animal suffering. And yet its legacy grew. The Plague Dogs became a secret cult legend whispered among animation students as proof that cartoons could express absolute tragedy. It is a film that does not end happily, because real life rarely does. Number 10. When the Wind Blows, 1986. At first glance, it seemed gentle, a quiet British cartoon about an elderly couple preparing for nuclear war. The style was quaint, almost storybook-like. But When the Wind Blows hid an atomic scream beneath its polite surface. As the bombs fell, the tone shifted from domestic comedy to apocalyptic horror. The old couple built a shelter from doors and tape, following official instructions that would never save them. They waited for help that never came. Slowly, radiation poisoning began its work. The animation softened the horror, making it more intimate, more unbearable. David Bowie's haunting theme only deepened the dread. Governments hated it, broadcasters hesitated. School boards debated whether it could be shown to students. It revealed how propaganda disguised death as procedure, how ordinary people trusted systems designed to fail them. Behind the scenes, animators combined hand-drawn characters with miniature models, giving the illusion of safety collapsing around them. The director, Jimmy Murakami, said he wanted to make something honest about annihilation. The studio almost pulled funding after preview screenings left audiences in stunned silence. Decades later, the film resurfaced, during renewed fears of nuclear conflict. Critics hailed it as timeless and terrifying a forgotten gem that made global destruction feel heartbreakingly personal. When the Wind Blows was not a cartoon for children. It was a requiem for humanity disguised as one, a lullaby for a dying world that still echoes whenever sirens wail. Number 9. Grave of the Fireflies, 1988. At first sight, it looked like another tender Japanese anime about siblings. But Grave of the Fireflies was a quiet dagger to the heart. Produced by Studio Ghibli, the same company known for gentle fantasies, this one stripped away all comfort. It told of Seita and Setsuko, two children struggling to survive in war-torn Japan after their city was destroyed by bombings. There were no monsters, no heroes, no miracles, only hunger and slow fading hope. The fireflies that glowed around them symbolized both beauty and mortality. Viewers expected magic. Instead, they got a mirror held to human cruelty. When it premiered, audiences were devastated. Parents wept openly. Children left theaters confused and trembling. Critics praised it as a masterpiece, but some schools banned it, fearing its brutal honesty. Television stations hesitated to air it, fearing backlash from families who mistook it for a fantasy tale. Behind the scenes, director Isao Takahata drew from his own memories of the war. Every frame was personal. He refused to romanticize tragedy. The studio feared it would be too grim to succeed, and they were right. It flopped commercially on release, though years later it became revered as one of the greatest anti-war films ever made. Grave of the Fireflies taught a generation that animation could speak truth more powerfully than live action. It was not escapism, it was confession. And even decades later, its sadness never fades. The fireflies still burn in the darkness like small souls refusing to die. Number 8. Batman Mask of the Phantasm, 1993. When Warner Bros. Announced an animated Batman movie, fans expected a kid-friendly expansion of the hit TV show. What they got instead was a noir tragedy soaked in loss and vengeance. Batman Mask of the Phantasm followed Bruce Wayne's doomed romance and the birth of a ghostly assassin who mirrored his pain. It was not about gadgets or villains, it was about grief. The animation was moody and mature, filled with fog rain and silence. The tone was closer to Hitchcock than Saturday morning cartoons. Children expecting quips and explosions were met with melancholy reflections on death and broken love. When it hit theaters, critics loved it, but families stayed away. It was too bleak for young audiences and too animated for adults. Studio executives panicked, slashing its marketing and pulling it from cinemas after just a few weeks. It bombed. Yet slowly it rose again, becoming a cult legend among animation fans. Behind the scenes, Bruce Timm and Paul Dini fought for creative control, refusing studio demands to lighten the tone. They wanted tragedy, not spectacle. Their defiance birthed one of the most mature superhero films of its time. Today, Mask of the Phantasm is celebrated as the soul of Batman's storytelling. It showed that beneath the mask was a man consumed by grief, not glory. A film too dark for children, yet too honest to fade into obscurity. Number 7. The Secret of NIMH, 1982. Don Bluth left Disney to make animation dangerous again. His first independent film, The Secret of NIMH, was proof. It looked like a fairy tale about field mice, but beneath its glowing colors lay a story about experiments, cruelty, and rebellion. Mrs. Brisby, a timid mouse, had to save her family with help from rats genetically altered by human scientists. Children watched talking animals. Adults saw a nightmare about intelligence and exploitation. The movie's tone was shadowed and somber. Characters died. Magic and science blurred until morality itself dissolved. Censors were uncertain. Some countries trimmed scenes of blood and death. Parents complained that the film was far too intense for small viewers. Critics, however, were fascinated, calling it a return to the dark power of early Disney classics. Behind the scenes, Bluth's studio nearly collapsed under pressure. Animators worked without rest, desperate to prove they could rival the corporate giant they had left. The result was stunning, but costly. Financial struggles forced the team into bankruptcy soon after release. The Secret of NIMH did not vanish, though. It became a cult treasure inspiring generations of animators who craved risk over comfort. It whispered that courage could come from fear and that truth sometimes lives in shadows. The Secret of NIMH was not just an animated adventure, it was rebellion painted in light and darkness reminding audiences that bravery often looks nothing like happiness. Number 6. Fritz the Cat, 1972. In a decade ruled by flower power and rebellion, one animated film took counterculture further than anyone expected. Fritz the Cat arrived like a Molotov cocktail, hurled at censorship itself. Directed by Ralph Bakshi and based on Robert Crumb's underground comic, it was the first cartoon ever to receive an X rating in America. Yet it wasn't the shock value alone that made it unforgettable. It was how it turned animation into social critique. The film followed a mischievous alley cat wandering through a caricature of 1970s America. He sought freedom but found hypocrisy at every turn. Beneath its chaotic humor lay biting commentary on race, class, and disillusionment. For young adults burned out by idealism, Fritz was the perfect anti-hero. For parents expecting another Disney tale, it was blasphemy. Censors erupted in outrage. Theaters were raided. Religious groups protested outside screenings. Newspapers accused Bakshi of corrupting youth. But in the chaos, the film made history, earning millions on a tiny budget and proving animation wasn't just for children anymore. Behind the scenes, Crumb disowned the film, disgusted by its commercial success, while Bakshi defended it as political art. Their feud became legend in underground culture. Despite bans and boycotts, Fritz the Cat became a countercultural milestone. It inspired a wave of adult animation across Europe and Japan and turned Bakshi into an outlaw auteur. Even today, the film remains raw, unfiltered, and divisive, proof that rebellion sometimes meows instead of roars. Number 5. Heavy Metal, 1981. When heavy metal hit theaters, audiences didn't know what to expect. It wasn't a single story, but a kaleidoscope of nightmares and fantasies tied together by a glowing orb called the Loch-Nar, a symbol of death, corruption, and power. Each chapter plunged viewers into different worlds of science fiction horror and dark erotica. What united them was their nihilistic tone and adult imagination. Critics didn't know how to label it. Too graphic for kids, too surreal for mainstream adults. Yet fans of rock music and underground comics embraced it instantly. Its soundtrack, filled with Black Sabbath Blue Oyster Cult and Sammy Hagar, turned it into a midnight movie sensation. Teenagers snuck into screenings whispering that it was a cartoon made for grown-ups, not children. Censors in several countries panicked over its violence and mature imagery. Theatrical releases were limited, and for years it disappeared from home video due to music rights battles. Behind the scenes, animators from around the world worked independently on each sequence, using rotoscoping, airbrushing, and psychedelic color to push boundaries. Despite being dismissed by critics, heavy metal gained immortality. It influenced a generation of artists from Ridley Scott to the creators of The Matrix. It proved animation could be adult avant-garde and anarchic all at once. What began as a magazine adaptation became a manifesto of artistic freedom. Heavy metal didn't just break rules, it obliterated them. In its wake, the line between cartoons and cinema was never the same again. Number 4. Akira, 1988. In the neon chaos of future Tokyo came a film that changed everything. Akira wasn't just an anime, it was a revolution. Set in a dystopian city rebuilt after nuclear war, It followed two childhood friends, Kaneda and Tetsuo, as their bond disintegrated under the weight of psychic power corruption and destiny. It was loud, brutal, and philosophical all at once. When it premiered, Western audiences were unprepared. They thought anime meant cute robots and cheerful heroes. Akira destroyed that illusion with scenes of psychic explosions, government cover-ups, and existential despair. The violence was shocking, but the story was deeper, a prophecy about youth crushed by authority and technology spiraling out of control. Censors debated whether to cut it. Some theaters refused to screen it altogether. Critics called it too intense for animation, while others hailed it as visionary. Behind the scenes, director Katsuhiro Otomo spent years and millions animating every light glint and neon sign by hand. His team worked until exhaustion, creating over 2,000 shots with unprecedented detail. The gamble nearly bankrupted its producers, but it paid off. Akira became a cult phenomenon, inspiring countless filmmakers from Christopher Nolan to the Wachowskis. It opened the door for global anime fandom and redefined what storytelling through animation could achieve. Even now, Akira feels prophetic. Its imagery of collapsing cities and mutated humanity still haunts popular culture. It was not made for children, but for anyone who ever looked at the future and saw both wonder and terror staring back. Number 3. Perfect Blue, 1997. At a glance, it looked like another J-pop-inspired anime about an idol chasing fame. But Perfect Blue was a psychological descent so harrowing it made seasoned critics uneasy. Directed by Satoshi Kon in his debut, it followed Mima, a singer who abandons her pop career to become an actress, only to face obsession, paranoia, and madness as her identity begins to fracture. Audiences expecting glitz and melody instead watched her world crumble under voyeurism and mental collapse. The animation was sleek yet disturbing. Reality and illusion bled together until viewers couldn't tell what was real. It was a film about fame's cost and the predators that lurk behind adoration. When it premiered, the controversy was instant. Some theaters refused to show it. Others required warning notices at the door. Critics praised its brilliance but warned that it wasn't for children or the faint-hearted. It was mistaken by many for a horror movie because of its tension and brutality. The Japanese press debated whether such darkness belonged in animation at all. Behind the scenes, Kon's crew wrestled with budget cuts and studio interference. He used those constraints to fuel creativity, crafting scenes of dreamlike disorientation that became his signature style. Western audiences discovered it later and were stunned. Directors like Darren Aronofsky openly cited it as inspiration for Black Swan. Perfect Blue shattered boundaries between cartoon fantasy and psychological realism. It proved that the human mind could be the darkest stage of all. Number 2. The Black Cauldron, 1985. For Disney, the 80s were a strange time. They wanted to grow up but still cling to innocence. The Black Cauldron was supposed to be their epic comeback, a darker fairy tale full of magic, war, and death. Instead, it became the studio's most feared project. Based on Lloyd Alexander's novels, it told of a young pig keeper named Taran who fought the Horned King, a skeletal tyrant, seeking an ancient cauldron that could raise an army of the dead. The imagery was gothic and grim. Skeleton soldiers marched through fog. The villain's face melted in shadow. Children cried during test screenings. Executives panicked. The film was nearly rated PG-13, a first for Disney. Animators were ordered to remove scenes of burning flesh and torture. Director Ted Berman fought to keep the darker tone, but lost. Even with cuts, it was still frightening. When it released, it bombed. Critics called it too grim for kids, too strange for adults. It nearly bankrupted Disney's animation division and went unseen for decades. But time changed its fate. Fans rediscovered it, calling it the studio's lost Gothic masterpiece. Behind the scenes, the Black Cauldron's failure forced Disney to reinvent itself. Without it, there might never have been The Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast. The film that almost killed Disney ended up saving it indirectly by forcing evolution. It stands today as proof that even the brightest kingdoms must walk through darkness before rediscovering light. Number 1. Princess Mononoke, 1997. From Studio Ghibli came an epic too fierce for fairy tales. Princess Mononoke was no bedtime story. It was a myth soaked in blood and moral ambiguity. Directed by Hayao Miyazaki, it followed a cursed prince caught in a war between humans destroying the forest and the gods fighting to defend it. Every frame burned with anger and awe. Audiences expecting gentle magic were stunned. Heads rolled. Wolves and boars fought with human soldiers in gruesome battles. Yet beneath the violence lay compassion. No side was purely evil. Humanity's greed clashed with nature's fury, and neither could truly win. Censors in the West hesitated to release it uncut. One American distributor demanded edits. Studio Ghibli famously sent them a samurai sword engraved with the words, "No cuts." It was a declaration that art should not be sanitized for comfort. Behind the scenes, the production nearly broke Miyazaki. He considered retirement afterward, saying he had given everything he had to its creation. It became Japan's highest-grossing film at the time, transforming animation's reputation from childish diversion to cinematic power. In the years since Princess Mononoke has become a symbol of artistic defiance. It reminds us that animation can hold rage, tenderness, and tragedy in equal measure. It was too dark for children, but too beautiful for silence. Cartoons once thought to be harmless became mirrors reflecting the fears of adulthood. Each of these films proved that animation isn't a genre, it's a voice. Sometimes playful, sometimes brutal, always human. Which of these dark visions stayed with you the most? Like the video, subscribe for more hidden histories, and comment your choice below.